Our next presentation is the Department of Transportation, and we have with us the brand new Director of the Department of Transportation, Veronica Macbeth.
Hi, good afternoon or late morning to everyone.
Good morning, welcome.
Thank you. I know some of the faces here, so it's good to see you all, and it's, hey, John. Looking forward to getting to know you all. So I will say, grant me some grace. This is my fourth day at work, so be kind. So I just want to do like a little quick intro of myself, just so you can kind of get to know me a little bit, and then I'll get started in giving our presentation. And as soon as I can find my notes for my here we go. So again, thank you all for being here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. I am coming from the federal government for the last 3 years as an appointee in the Biden-Harris administration. So I have the wrong notes, you guys. I'm starting off great. Give me 1 second. That's not them either. All right, we may be just jumping into the presentation. At any rate, I'm coming here from the Biden-Harris administration. I was a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy for the last 3 years, where I worked on a lot of policy issues that included grant that came from the Secretary's office. So a lot of the new discretionary grants that came from the bipartisan infrastructure law, things like reconnecting communities, thriving communities. I did a lot of work with our equity and civil rights issues within that particular office. I spent a lot of time with the Secretary, having the opportunity to do a lot of briefings with him as he moved about the country, talking about the investments that we were making at historic levels in both infrastructure and kind of righting the wrongs of the past, where we were able to invest in a lot of disadvantaged communities where things have been historically unfairly taken away or added, and making things right for things that have been done wrong in the past. So I'll just stop there. So I'm happy to.
Just in case, here's your notes.
Perfect. Thanks. So more notes. So I'm going to just talk a little bit more today then about our capital improvement program, and talking about the budgetary exercises and the strategic investments in safety, mobility, and the sustainability of our city. The projects that we are prioritizing and the funding decisions that have come up and will shape the daily experiences of our residents, the local businesses, and the definition of our city's economic vitality for the next decade. And for the reasons that we must acknowledge how to financially constrain and shortfalls that we've experienced with the current budget and the impending budgets that we see here forward, that we will be able to deliver projects to Baltimoreans, or any of the experienced or upcoming deferred maintenance, project delays, and the reduced service levels that have disproportionately impacted our most vulnerable communities, compounding the inequities and limiting opportunities. And we've watched our residents as they notice that they have consistently been passed up for improvements year after year, and they have to walk further and wait longer to get the opportunities they need to move about the city. So it oftentimes calls for us to make difficult decisions about what we are prioritizing, and having the opportunity to advocate for ourselves, to ask for additional resources, and to explore improving financial mechanisms within Baltimore. So despite the challenges that we have had also unprecedented opportunities to secure funding at both federal, state, and local levels. So federal programs, which I do know a little bit about, as I mentioned, such as the bipartisan infrastructure law, which has helped Baltimore significantly over the last couple years. where we've gotten recent funding at the federal level for partnerships as we've prioritized projects like the West Baltimore United, which is a Reconnecting Communities project where we were just recently awarded $85.5 million, notably the second largest award in the country. We have had the opportunity to really address critical infrastructure and the ability to increase safety and accessibility for all roadway users. And most recently, we have taken the opportunity to build on the success like West Baltimore United as the foundation for securing additional federal support for large modernization projects like the Red Line construction. So taking a look at strategic grant applications and leveraging public-private partnerships and maximizing local matches will be very essential to bring these resources home. And additionally, making sure that we are aligning our capital plans with the broader equity and sustainability goals will ensure that we remain competitive for funding opportunities and targeting resilient infrastructure, improving public transit and multimodal networks. So now we'll just take a dive into the impacts and opportunities posed within our capital improvement program for fiscals 26 to 31. And so I'll look forward to our engaging discussion. Thank you so much for finding that. So I'll give you an opportunity to just take a look at our mission. But just notable things include what we are responsible for maintaining, which is 2,000 miles of roadways, 7 miles of interstate highway, and 298 bridges and culverts, 456 miles of alleys, 179 miles of bikeways, 72,000 streetlights, 1,300 signalized intersections, 250,000 traffic and information signs, and 50 million linear feet of conduit. One notable thing that we don't have written here, but is very critical, is how we're one of very, very few localities that are equally responsible for the transition of local roads that transition from various counties into Baltimore City, where we are actually responsible for state roads and subsequently also federal roads. So think of like Reisterstown Road that comes into Baltimore City, although it technically starts as a county road as soon as it makes its way into the city. We are responsible for it, but we are responsible for it within our own funding mechanisms. Also, I-83, we are responsible for it despite it being an interstate. Here, just taking a quick look at our org chart. So this is the kind of compacted org chart, as you can see. Somehow they managed to throw my name up top just really quickly. They were surprised when I came back on Tuesday. So just giving you the start of just a little bit about our community engagement in determining projects. So specifically, community members will have multiple ways of sharing their interest as to how they want things included in our improvement plans. And they typically will reach out several ways through our liaisons, social media, website, or several platforms. And so with this, we start with our liaisons. So we have liaisons, which are personnel who regularly engage with community members and stakeholders and on our agency services and project-specific public meetings and issues. So our liaison teams maintain constant communication with our community stakeholders on all capital improvement projects and keeping them informed and engaged from concept to construction. And each liaison is assigned to a specific council district and allowing them the opportunity to provide and build solid relationships with both the council districts and the community associations within those districts, as well as the representatives, residents, and other stakeholders. So within the communications component, DOT's communication section provides the information about the capital projects via social media, the DOT website, and through various other forums such as Nextdoor and Gov Delivery. We've even begun to dabble on Facebook, Instagram, and I guess X, formerly known as Twitter. I encourage you to take a look at our Instagram and Facebook. I found some pretty fun banter. Recently noticed the conversation about to cone or not to cone, or to lawn chair or not to lawn chair during snowstorms. And I see you chuckling over there because there was some lively conversation about it. The formal or informal room is not to do it, so I'm looking around. If you do it, don't do it. Additionally, 311. Residents can also submit requests for most DOT services through the 311 system, and they'll be provided a service request number. Also encouraging folks to keep that number to double back to make sure that we have gotten things done that you're requesting. So some of our key challenges. Our challenges related to funding and rising costs are continuing to grow exponentially, as a lot of us know. A lack of funding that started in 2010 and continued since then have grown into the enormous challenges we are experiencing today. So we have roads riddled with potholes and patches and traffic signals that have collapsed due to rusting. As times go on, the snowballs of our deferred maintenance and capital improvement will continue rolling and growing. And so we have countless maintenance issues, unaddressed needs to improve infrastructure, and a backlog of unfunded requests. We have limited funding, not only creating higher maintenance costs, but ultimately resulting in higher construction costs due to inflation, higher material costs, and just the overall rising costs of doing business in today's times. So DOT is constantly seeking additional funding opportunities and partnerships to leverage available funding. Our projects are also are more costly than in previous years, since we are including necessary safety upgrades and the accessibility elements that are required for our citizens. We have been and will continue to seek out all funding opportunities and to build partnerships to address the needs of our city. Competition throughout the industry has also had a negative impact on our hiring and retention of experienced staff, has created some vacancies and placed additional workload on our remaining staff. And so throughout the city, there are countless demands placed on our agency for solutions and improvements to infrastructure. However, the reality is that present-day resources we are being given cannot adequately reduce the accumulated requests and make the changes that are so desperately needed. So obviously, our goal is always a safe and reliable and accessible transportation system in Baltimore City, and it's a critical component for the city to succeed. And without sufficient funding to support these upgrades to our system, we will continue to dig ourselves into a deeper hole. And so after the reduction of the HUR funding in 2010, the city was forced to issue $200 million, which is essentially debt, if you will, in county transportation bonds in order to repave roads and to fund transportation capital projects. And I'll give you a moment just to take a look at the slide up there. So this slide is just giving you a bit more of a breakdown about local funding and highway user revenue. So historically within Baltimore City, HUR has been devoted first to operational budget needs. So various eligible expenses across DOT, BCRP, and DPW, police and debt service to previous DOT issued bonds. So the remaining funds after operating expenses then are provided to our capital program. And so as recently as 1998, Baltimore City received 15% of the local highway user revenue dollars. But that percentage has since dropped precipitously ever since, and despite the city still having to maintain the same amount of infrastructure. So as we know, we are always being asked to do more with less. And so due to the disparity in this responsibility, during the Great Recession, the severe cuts to local government HUR allocations that went into effect everywhere impacted Baltimore City more than any other local government jurisdiction. And so in total, Baltimore City lost out on approximately $900 million over the course of this time in HUR and approximately $3.6 billion in potential federal matching funds to repair the city's aging infrastructure to create jobs. So prior to these HUR cuts, there was enough money to handle both maintenance and to fund the critical capital projects within the city. But by fiscal 2010, the HUR cuts were just so severe that they could no longer cover the full operating expenses of the city, specifically in DOT, let alone leave enough money for the critical and necessary capital projects. So in response to the ongoing cuts, the city was forced to take out loans in the form of MDOT transportation revenue bonds and bonds that the city must pay back to the state with interest. And so during fiscal 24, Baltimore City is projected to pay over $14 million in debt service due to the severe cuts made to our HUR under previous administrations. And these debt service payments will continue for years to come. Baltimore City is currently operating at 2005 HUR funding levels, which is at $37 million, which actually only has the same buying power as $23.6 million today. So we're already operating at a deficit. So House Bill 1187 successfully passed in 2022, which helped reverse the cuts. However, the lost revenue are dollars that we will never see again or likely get back. Taking a look at this chart here, we're talking about the increase in HUR funding devoted to Baltimore City. So Baltimore City maintains all numbered routes. So Maryland 139 on Charles Street, Maryland 45 on York Road, and Maryland 147 on Harford Road, just to give a few examples. Whereas, again, as I had previously mentioned, other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland, these same roads are the responsibility of the Maryland State Highway Administration, which, again, makes us very unique for our responsibilities where they are receiving state highway management, but we are required to management under our own funding mechanisms. So cities in general, nationwide, struggle with aging infrastructure compared to the counties, which may have infrastructure not of similar age or origins. And here, taking a look at this chart, you'll see that Baltimore has lost approximately $900 million, just under $1 billion in state funds and $3.6 billion in potential federal matching since 2009 due to funding cuts to highway user revenue. So Baltimore City is operating, again, as previously mentioned, at 2005 HUR funding levels in 2025. So we are operating at a severe deficit and 20 years behind what would be interest-bearing rates. So at $37 million in 2005 has an approximate, again, $23.6 million in buying power today. Here we see Baltimore City is projected to be operating with less than it did 10 years prior, and combined with the rising infrastructure costs and continuance of deferred maintenance. So accomplishments with immediate funds increase that we have done include 28 traffic signal intersection reconstructions that were in dire need of updates. We have completed final design and construction funding to traffic projects in following areas: communications upgrade, both wireless and hardwired, transportation management center upgrades. We have also concluded and helped with intelligent transportation systems improvements, 27 additional miles of roadway resurfacing in 2025, which will be inclusive of complete streets designs. Approximately 700 additional blocks of footways will be reconstructed from fiscal 24 versus fiscal 26. Approximately 650 ADA ramp upgrades will be reconstructed and 2.8 miles of sidewalks for fiscal '26. And then lastly, traffic safety improvements and complete streets upgrades citywide. So without a continuation of HUR levels beyond fiscal '27, which would be comparable to fiscal '25 and fiscal '27 levels, the following impacts are anticipated, and they are dire. The utilization of HUR for the purposes of funding the ADA partial consent decree, which was mandated to be $44 million total over 4 years, and beginning in fiscal '25, which was the first year, was $8 million, and each subsequent year through fiscal '28 at $12 million per year. This redistribution was likely to be used as a portion, potentially as local match funds, which totaled $40 million to the West Baltimore United Reconnecting Communities Grant, which reducing the DOT allocation total within HUR funding levels from $94.1 million to down to $42.1 million. Notably also, we will be unable to proceed with major bridge projects. Of the state of Maryland's top 25 most traveled bridges that are listed to be in poor condition, Baltimore has 12, which is nearly 50% of all the bridges in state of Maryland that are listed to be in poor condition. Without commitments and funding to those projects listed in annual structure management plans that are submitted to the Maryland State Highway and Federal Highway Administration, Baltimore City's federal funding will also be significantly at risk. And in a city where about 29% of the city's households do not have accessible ways to a personal vehicle and are in historically disadvantaged and underserved neighborhoods, the numbers can be as high as 66%. And DOT will be unable to fund safety and accessibility improvements for these residents. And so approximately 25 miles of annual roadways that are also needed in resurfacing and complete streets improvements run in jeopardy that they will further deteriorate with rising costs to move towards full reconstruction. Limited to no HUR funding will be available for traffic signal infrastructure, maintenance, and will further continue to deteriorate and not meet current communication standards. And only about 10% of the city's current traffic signals and communications, which is only about 1,300 intersections, limited to no HUR funds, would be available for new complete streets projects and practices which are required by law. An overall inability to maintain existing infrastructure for Baltimore City DOT is again already at a combined approximate $1.8 billion cost in deferred maintenance of existing assets. That includes sidewalks and bridges, roadways, traffic signals, alleys, lighting, and et cetera. So I'm painting a pretty bleak and dire picture right now. And again, limited to no HUR funds would also be available for even basic preservation of existing pavement, alleys, and footways. And the federal formula funding match that would be expected to be essentially $10.5 million annually, which is the bare minimum for the local match in outer years. And these alleys and footways budgeted for fiscal '28 would be on 10% of the budget, which is scheduled versus fiscal '26. For resurfacing, the budget for fiscal '28 would be only 14% in comparison to fiscal '26. So Baltimore City DOT has equally, as a lot of us know here, included the Hanover Street Bridge in one of its priority letters for at least 10 years. And it had not at any point gotten funding at that point or seen as a priority. And Baltimore City has strongly also committed to the ADA partial consent decree, so dedicating an exclusive financial account to efforts to satisfy this agreement. As I previously mentioned, that's $44 million. And the ADA improvements are continually coordinated and integrated with our capital resurfacing, footways, streetscapes, and bridge projects. However, per the terms of the agreement, are above and beyond with no overlap in our other project locations. I know that was a lot of information, but to summarize, there are some very, very critical gaps in our funding versus what we have going on in our existing just baseline requirements to move about and do basic work within the city. So here we have listed our program priorities, talking about state of good repair, complete streets, traffic safety, sustainable transportation alternatives, as well as plan implementation. So just noting a few things. So nearly 70% of our roadways need to be repaved. And we're also just trying to make sure that our roadways are in safer and more aligned with national best practices in correlation to traffic calming. The city's complete street efforts are also about protecting the safety of all people and our most vulnerable users, especially taking a look at making sure that our transportation serves in the capacity of accessibility and mobility. And again, HUR funds are critical in this component. Taking a look at our Charm City Circulator ridership, which was approximately 1.3 million in passenger trips in 2023. Harbor Connector had approximately 230,000 trips in 2023. And our transportation options are used to make sure the quality of life needs are met by our residents. And 27% of our residents, as I previously mentioned, do not have access to vehicles. And also want to talk about just that 27,000 Baltimore City public school students who walk from their homes and utilize MTA during the school year. They also need safe routes and their daily commute and accessibility as they move about the city. Here we have our guiding principles as it relates to complete streets prioritization process. And complete streets have greatly benefited the city, reducing crashes and deaths, reducing collision and injury costs, lower emissions, improving health, employment opportunities, walking, biking, or using transit, creating shared experiences and interactions, and also increasing business investment and economic revenue, better quality of life and lower transportation costs overall, recreation access, and even the increase in property values. Here we see our equity map, and it provides like an index score and a combination based upon the following things listed. So taking a look, relative to previous years, equity was emphasized as a leading factor, followed by asset conditions and safety, with a reduced focus on complaint-driven projects and the equal spreading of projects based on geographic and council boundaries. And DOT determined the area of focus for equity throughout an analysis that built off of the Complete Streets equity section. So the study resulted in a map of census block groups in Baltimore City weighted for transportation needs. And the factors that were considered in the map are noted here, which were public transit usage, household vehicle access, income, race, and the median age of the residents. And the projects were overlaid on this map to determine the distribution of projects in high-need areas. Here we take a look at DOT long-term capital needs. So again, safety and accessibility are the paramount things for a thriving city. Deferred maintenance and can bring us to a state of good repair, and that's approximately $1.3 billion in need. If we take a look and focus on the populations without vehicles, that would also mean that, again, we need to highlight the improvements for sidewalks with ADA ramps, traffic signals, better transit operations and service, lighting, and bicycle facilities for those who don't have accessibility to cars to move about the city safely and with accessible options and mobility options. And then we also need to think about the city's reliance on traffic signals to move vehicles and people through intersections safely. We have significantly failing infrastructure. And from the TMC, we can only communicate with approximately 10% of the signals within the city. We have done a complete assessment in 2018 to evaluate signals citywide, which have identified those that should be prioritized for replacement, but we have very limited funding to actually support that need. And for overall traffic management and operations, the signals, again, need to be safe and also have the ability to be adjusted to traffic demand management processes, and have video detection and be agile to support the city's goal towards a multimodal city. These next slides coming up are just highlighting some of our recent accomplishments. So some of the noted accomplishments include Harford Road from Northern Parkway to the city line, Milford Avenue, Liberty Heights to Post Road, Dukeland Street to Wilmarco Avenue to Wilkins Avenue, Georgetown Road from Caton Avenue to DeSoto Road, Boston Street from Kenwood Avenue to Leakin Street. Just a few notable items. And previously stated, we're working to continue to identify the alternative funding resources for our city match for the Reconnecting grant we just received earlier this month. And we do have an upcoming call with USDOT on January 30th, which will begin the discussion about how to start the process for the full funding agreement and also delineating how we'll move forward with establishing the outline for the funding process for receiving the funds from the government, and then also discussion on how we will institute our match. So 2 general strategy and goals that would categorize within our within the CIP would include safety, accessibility, and multimodal activities, and then also state of good repair and maintenance of infrastructure. This graph represents specific funding targets for BCDOT in fiscal 26. Federal formula funds for an annual request of $42 million. General funding, which is expected to be solely in HUR, with $94.1 million being the target. And other funding, including, is represented as various sources. And that is essentially private payments, i.e. for footways and alleys and various approved grants. And this pie chart is just an example of federal formula funding usage for fiscal 26. This one shows highway user revenue usage proposed for fiscal 26. Here notes highway reconstruction accounts, primarily utilized for construction contracts that have been remediated or plan to be remediated through 311 service requests for the deteriorated sidewalks. This will happen through full block evaluations and will be replaced as needed with each request. Similarly for alleys, and this will happen again with condition assessments. And all of this would happen through capital dollars when repairs exceed the capability of internal DOT forces, and that repairs would be done by our maintenance division. Here show requests for funding within traffic safety. And here are the HCIP locations selected by reviewing pedestrian crash data. These locations either have high pedestrian crashes or high pedestrian generators, such as school walking routes, parks, shopping centers, and top priority locations for safety and near future implementations. Oops, sorry. All right, I'm gonna hit the next slide. This is listing DOT's plannings towards zero activities. So some of the recent data we have that there has been a total of 17,313 total crashes, 5,347 injuries via crashes, and 47 fatal crashes. And that's the annual average over 5 years. So basically, that's 45 to 50 crashes per day and an average of 2 every hour. And that's too many. So taking a look here, continued commitments for the Greenway Trails program, and it's broken into various sections. And BCDOT maintains active on grants and ensuring success of awarded grants, which includes timelines and other things. And we are continually being responsible for the pursuit of additional grant funding. Here, we're taking a look at fiscal 26 proposed funding commitments to 9 bridges with a plan for 22 within the overall 6-year program. So of the 22 bridges in the CIP, 18 of these bridges are rated in poor condition. Baltimore City, again, is responsible for annual structure management plans with an outline for the entire bridge program. Commitments are to ensure bridge sufficiency ratings, funding, design plans, with risks to federal funding and budgetary controls. So the current HUR targets within this 6-year CIP are unable to accommodate funding to the full bridge program. And so obviously we do need more investment and maintaining of the funding for this. And so we have future plans to apply for discretionary funding for additional state of good repair. Federal Highway Administration has a lot of funding through bipartisan infrastructure law, which is guaranteed funding through fiscal 26. So I know we're going to take some time and dig in and take a look at the options within that funding structure to try to get some things in before the expiration of federal funding. This is talking about our resurfacing requests. BCDOT as an agency is hoping to devote a large portion of our HUR increase directly to infrastructure maintenance and state of good repair as it relates to roadway pavement conditions. So what the public sees and drives on every day. And I'll say this as just a resident, I might have hit a pothole or 3. So don't give me that look. And I imagine you all might have too. So we are actively making sure that we address these issues with our HUR funding. The focus of proposed funding here, as far as reconstruction and streetscape, we are looking within this section to achieve final construction funding commitments. There's a 10-year limitation to projects within federal funding. And the streetscape section with these funds expects to have 7 projects that are fully funded for construction, with all of those projects at 95% engineering design. And so a second cycle of projects are at initial engineering design phases, and we'll look to have outer year construction funds, and that will be subject to the ability to have local match dollars. And again, when you're hearing ability to have local match dollars, I think you just need to think about the cycle through of us having challenges now to have match dollars. So again, it circles all the way back through to the fact that we are not getting enough funding in our budget as is, and then trying to figure out how do we propel and move ourselves forward for additional funding and additional planning when we're not getting enough funding from the beginning. And I'm wrapping up, so bear with me. I have a couple more slides. So here we have traffic signals and spot locations. There are over 130 signals that are in need of being reconstructed. And while we can leverage federal funding, we still need the local match. And to continue to develop contracts for signal reconstruction, which makes the local funding very critical for the safety of the citizens of Baltimore. This does not include requests for new signals, which generally cost about $300,000 to $400,000. The TMC needs new software, new monitors, and equipment replacements across the board, which currently is inoperable equipment and no money for repairs for them. And traffic signals and the systems that support them are critical to the safety and mobility of all transportation users as well. And so grants. Here, we're taking a look at requests for planning. Hanover Street did receive a RAISE grant, which is $15.5 million, which was a discretionary grant that came through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Druitt Park Lake Drive as well, $6 million. And then ferry landings, which is $5 million and was previously appropriated. Here, ADA infrastructure and upgrades, matches for BCDOT internal resurfacing programs. Maintenance will perform the paving. Contractors will perform the ADA ramps to meet federal compliance. And then resurfacing as a modification to these federal compliance standards. And then again, ADA has the partial consent decree, which again totals $44 million. And as previously mentioned, $8 million from last year, and then $12 million each year from fiscal 26 through fiscal 28. And then we will reevaluate the funding mechanisms to continue making ADA improvements throughout the city. Here we have major programs, which list the primary areas that I had talked about before. And again, funding is predominantly within fiscal 27. Again, as you can see, dramatic decreases in HUR targets for the last 4 years of this 6-year cycle. And I'm going to just keep hammering this home, is that we are going to keep struggling to maintain local match efforts to these federal funds. And combined with Department of Planning's approach of restricting building of funds over multiple fiscal years and the full fund for a phase in a single fiscal year. So that includes like design and construction. And so here we'll see policy issues and conclusions. So maintaining and restoring the city's transportation infrastructure is a major component of our responsibilities. The upkeep of infrastructure is always going to be reflected in our CIP request. Transforming streets that were once designed as throughways to make them destinations and a safe part of our road network through complete streets projects will always benefit city residents and visitors for years to come. And then working towards zero traffic fatalities and injuries through our traffic safety projects is an essential part of our work. So that concludes all of my talking at you. I look forward to talking with you in this role, and also as we move forward to any questions or conversations.
Thank you so much, Director Macbeth.
Sure.
It's wonderful to have you here. And I want to just back up and welcome you to the department. And that was an impressive presentation for day 4 on the job. So
I thank my colleagues
really
over here for
appreciate it.
preparing me. So.
And with that, feel free to deflect any tough questions we may throw at you at your colleagues over there. But we can start with you, Commissioner Jolin.
Great, thank you so much. I do have a few questions here, and I'll start with the first one that comes to mind, which is any updates in CIP or any budget requests that are coming in for the study that was done, I believe, a couple of years ago on traffic signal retiming in the city, and if that's going to be part of what we're thinking about this year.
That's a great question, and I will deflect to Clea.
I can speak to that. So
Oh, Clea, you want to come up?
Clea Baumhofer, Chief of Traffic Engineering. So the city-wide retiming effort specifically is already fully funded and that project is ongoing. However, there is a signal communications and signal maintenance strategic plan that goes beyond just retiming that the director mentioned. That's more so our communications only to a small percentage currently of our signals that we're looking to grow. And that funding is within this package, at least for the next phase of it.
So I guess for the Baltimore City resident who's, just living life here, where would what's the timing on feeling like there's a substantial change when they're driving?
So we have been, for retiming, working on there's a rolling neighborhood by neighborhood or section by section of the city approach. So South Baltimore and the CBD have been retimed. And I would say some of the most visible changes are the addition of some leading pedestrian intervals where the pedestrian is allowed to start crossing before vehicles can go, just as a safety initiative. And along with that, just better coordination generally for traffic flow. The next segment will be East Baltimore. It's a pretty large segment, and that will be in the spring.
Thank you very much. My next question hopefully isn't too much in the weeds, but this past year we reviewed a DPW project, I believe, which there was a significant cost increase after the project was done due to a policy change in the repaving of the street after it was finished. So I'm curious about that particular policy change and the clarity of the necessity of that. And if, once that comes, the answer for that, if that policy change and those costs associated with repaving is part of everybody else being other agencies and this agency as well, CIP project requests for the future.
Valerie.
I'm Valerie LaCour, and I'm the chief of the ADA Compliance Division. So the policy you're talking about is actually the street cuts regulations, which went into effect in June of 2022. And we had a comprehensive outreach to not only city agencies, but to our utility partners. The cost that you're talking about with DPW, so DPW is replacing water mains. And the street cuts regulations require that if you disturb 50% of a street, you must resurface the entire street, curb to curb, the entire block. That in itself triggers FHWA, which is the Federal Highway Administration, requirements that if you resurface a block, you must update the ADA ramps at each end. Okay, so what DPW presented earlier this year is the fact that they need to resurface the streets, and they have calculated that additional cost based upon the street cuts regulations. And what needs to also be taken into account is that the ADA ramps need to be upgraded, and the city agency or the utility partner or the private developer who has to do the resurfacing of a full block is also responsible for the ADA ramps at the two intersections. It's a significant amount of money that we're talking about. It is not part of the consent decree or part of the other items that you saw in the ADA. We are currently working with DPW, with Steve Sharkey, who's now over the water and wastewater, to find a strategy to allow DPW to continue to do their water main upgrades and find a strategy of alternative funding or additional funding through the CIPs to be able to meet the federal regulations of ADA upgrades when they resurface the street. You're welcome.
Wonderful. Next question is about bike lanes. So I'm particularly concerned with the safety and the usage of the current bike lanes that we have. So I'm curious about what the current, since we have our street sweepers, which are different from our slightly smaller bike lanes. So the cleaning schedule of the bike lanes, and I remember, a couple years ago, maybe even last year, there was CIP request in for a specific bike lane sweeper or some sort of mechanism that would do that. So I'm curious about if that's in this bike budget that we have, if that is part of what we're thinking about for the next fiscal year.
That is a superb question, and let's do answer. I wish I knew everything.
Good afternoon. I'm Stu Sirota. I'm the Deputy Director for Planning and Sustainable Transportation. We are currently evaluating bike lane sweepers right now. We currently, for various snow events, we have 2 vehicles for plowing, but we are looking at expanding that fleet. I don't believe we have any specific requests in the current CIP for that, but we're looking beyond this year. So we're going to be taking this year to look at how we could expand in coming years, and by next year, there's a very good likelihood that we could have that in the next CIP request.
So what is our current cleaning schedule for all of our bike lanes in Baltimore?
In terms of cleaning schedules, we'd have to check with maintenance and get back to you on that. I don't have that information at present, but we can certainly find out and let you know within the next day or so.
Okay, thank you very much on that.
And just a reminder that vehicles are not capital eligible in the city of Baltimore.
Thank you, Sarah. Director, this question is for you.
All right.
I'm curious, I know you said day 3, day 4, so thanks for coming in and being a part of this team here. But I'm curious if these requests, do you feel, are accurately reflecting your priorities as the incoming director?
I would say yes. We actually, I can say this part is we spent some time over the last couple days talking with the Baltimore City House delegation in preparation for the governor's budget coming out and any anticipated cuts that could come to the city. And we worked to pull together, I would say, a transportation funding overview for them to kind of get ahead of the game, if you will, to let the city delegation know where our shortcomings are as far as like the funding that we have now and that we would potentially experience if there were any significant cuts to the city. So I think we were able to weigh in, and I was able to allow both the mayor's office and the governmental relations office know where we are foreseeing problems. As for me coming in at this place and stage, I do see that we're still underfunded. I feel like we are under-resourced. I am cautiously optimistic that I feel like that, there can be a light at the end of this tunnel, like when we can actively try to move forward to make sure that Baltimore is seen as, the great place that it actually is. I oftentimes feel like we have deferred funding to our friends in other counties that will not be named. But I think that we deserve, the resources and funding that they get. I mean, unfortunately, we haven't to date, but I think there is a great opportunity for us to provide a bill of sale as to why we deserve that amount of funding. You know, I think we've spent some good time over the last couple years during this last administration, you know, telling the federal government why we are deserving of federal funds, and telling the state why we're deserving of federal funds. You know, oftentimes when I was here the last cycle, they were not even supportive of us applying for federal grants, and often wouldn't even support us at that level. And I think I've seen a really big shift in the amount of partnership that we've had with the state. So I can only imagine that if we've gotten that level of partnership with the state, to me, that shows me a shift in support that we're having at the state level. And that if we are having that shift in support at the state level, I think, to me, it stands to reason that we will get the level of support we need to help, you know, provide solid reason that we need a significant amount of funding to help us make Baltimore a more equitable city, a city that is accessible, more mobile, and has the resources that our constituency needs.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
No more questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Councilman Bullock?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I will say I was encouraged by a few pieces of your presentation, discouraged by some in terms of the limited resources that we have. But it was refreshing to hear about this movement away from the complaint-driven council district boundary sort of approach, because I will say, as you adequately recognize the disparities we see along lines of race and age, it's particularly pronounced in some of the communities that I represent in West Baltimore. So I'm glad that you recognize that. To that end, there are there, as you said, the backlog of unfunded requests that are now accumulating, and particularly as it relates to things like traffic calming, we get a lot of complaints around, but also signalization of intersections, right? And so just that sobering number that you're talking about, $300,000 to $400,000 for a new installation. I see the Fayette Street, that road diet and safety study is also part of your plan, so encouraged to see that. So really just kind of bring together some of the pieces that you mentioned and reflecting that. Now to the couple questions I have. So West Baltimore United, very excited about the prospects there and that $85 million. But I'm looking at the line where it's, you know, originally requested $100 million with the $40 million local match. MTA contributed $60 million. Could anybody give a little more detail in terms of how those numbers moved or what we may be expecting there?
Yeah, I can give.
I know you can, so that's fine.
So I can give detail about how the numbers moved, right? So back then, I was at USDOT. So the numbers essentially shift. So I'll tell you, there was probably close to almost double the amount of requests for federal funding than was available. There's a split between how much money they were willing to award for construction versus planning funding for reconnecting communities. The exciting part about the fact that the number was lessened is that we got the second largest award. What happens with that $85.5 million coming down from $100 million, they basically called the city and said, hey, we know you asked for $100 million, but would you accept $85.5 million? Huge sign, because no awards had been confirmed or made at that point, but that was an excellent sign to say, like, we're actively considering awarding you any funding. The point of that is also because they were trying to essentially award more people funding for this, what could potentially the last cycle of reconnecting funding. We don't know how any of the transitions will happen in the next administration. And so in that particular cycle of reconnecting, it was expedited by probably 3 to 4 months. This, in theory, wasn't supposed to probably happen until the spring, and they actually shaved 3 to 4 months off of it. So as far as like the set aside that they had for construction funding, my understanding is like they were trying to figure out how the award would fit and match multiple folks, and I don't believe we were the only one asked to take less money. So I think it was better some than none, which is why we accepted 85.5 as opposed to 100.
Oh, absolutely, you're not going to turn down 85 million. But I will say this, and you've sort of anticipated my second question, which was the changing federal climate. Not that you have a crystal ball, but what could you envision moving forward, at least in the short term, or are there things we should be thinking about?
Right. So I don't have a crystal ball. What I do know is what is indoctrinated by the bipartisan infrastructure law is that the funding is guaranteed through fiscal 26. So there is still funding amounts left in several of the streams, raise, reconnecting, thriving, and a few other ones. So a lot of the big ones that we were awarded something in through the various cycles, there are still dollar amounts left. So there could essentially still be grants put out. What we don't know is, though, with the transition happening Monday, I'm imagining that the career staff that are there and managing this, they will have to wait until they get like the directives from the new appointed staff as to how they will want to move forward with putting out their version of these programs. Typically in the past, the same way, if you remember, we had Tiger grants, we had all the different names of grants, and that was based on the administration. So raise may not be raise anymore, reconnecting may not be reconnecting anymore, thriving may not be thriving anymore. So, but the money that is existing or remaining is still there through fiscal 26.
Thank
you.
Ms. Assistant Deputy Mayor?
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Horn?
Good presentation. Just have several questions. One is, Commission received several letters from the community, and I think my fellow commissioner will probably focus on a couple of them. I will just focus on a couple of the issues and just the themes. One theme is this idea of community engagement. So can you talk a little bit about sort of your community engagement policy, sort of your best practice? Some of the things that the letter was talking about is lack of transparency, lack of follow-up and follow-through with some projects. So can you just talk a little bit about community engagement?
Yes.
Or somebody from your team?
Did Asia come up or no? She did not. Oh. I was like, oh. No. Well, I can speak about it for what I know in its current state now. I know that they are, I think, in the process of doing a bit of an overhaul for style of how they're conducting and managing community engagement. And anybody, feel free to jump in for what you do know in that particular guise for what it is now. What I'm envisioning, I'm able to talk about. My thoughts are with community engagement. I like the opportunity of how we engage with the community in a very transparent way. I'm a cradle to the grave, if you will. So not just at the start of the project, or even if there is a project, like our engagement with communities should be well before projects even start. They should know who our community engagement or liaison officers are. They should be able to come to them at any time and have like open communications and concerns expressed to them. But more specifically with project community engagement, I think it should also equally start with them talking to the communities about projects that we are going to do, but not telling them that we're doing it unless it's something like your road is, crumbling beneath your feet. Like, yes, we're doing a resurfacing project and things like that. But for me, community engagement is an inclusive activity, which means that equally of going into a community and having a project going on there, you also want to talk to the community about project needs, right? So like the project is happening, yes, but like what are your needs in coordination with the project? What's the best way to communicate with you? How do you foresee your engagement with the Department of Transportation? You know, do you prefer having a monthly meeting? Do you prefer your engagement to be coordinated, you know, through emails? Like, I think it's like asking the community what their best format of engagement is. I think it's important to have somebody, if it's not DOT centric, as far as like having a consultant or a contractor, they should also be there. So they're recognizable when they're actually doing the work in the community. And I would go a step further. I think it was critically important, and when I worked here the last time, is having other city agencies there at other meetings. Almost every single time I had a community meeting, they asked for something about public works. They asked about the police. Well, I have this problem. Oh, but we're DOT. That doesn't matter. We still work for the city. So like my, I guess, like dangling piece of fruit, if you will, is like, we're going to tell you all about our stuff, but at the end of the meeting, we have the police here, we have public works, we have the housing department, we have the health department here. And like, actually, it is community engagement because these are critical parts of the community, whether it's just transportation or not. So that's one of the ways that I envision things moving forward. I see Sean here, so I'm going to also let him jump in. That's my envision, but I will allow him to talk probably more specifically too.
Sure. Thank you, Director. Sean Burnett, Chief of Planning, Baltimore City DOT. I'll be brief, but I think the Director's said a lot of great things that are what we're working towards now. In the past, some of the community engagement efforts have been choked by limited resources, particularly limited personnel. Moving forward, the sorts of broad-based things that we're doing to try and improve those relationships to make these projects seem more grassroots and less prescriptive is working closer with the Department of Planning, working closer with our community level planners with DHCD, trying to take our project priorities and create a more transparent and dynamic way of selecting projects. Integrating and using some of the already existing systems that the mayor's office has set up, the impact investment areas and the renewed focus on projects in those areas is a really good example. I think, you know, the greater point about concerns with DOT not being as responsive to communities comes a lot from many times when we go and we're funding a certain project and we talk to the community about what that project means for them, their reaction is that they've been asking for a litany of things, right? They've been asking for sidewalk improvements. They've been asking for new street lighting. And sometimes the individuals that come to talk to them are about a specific project that doesn't necessarily address those issues. So one of the big thrusts that the greater department is making, that planning is making, is to try and create an environment where those are taken into account, where when we are approaching communities, we're approaching with the guise of first listen and try to understand the greater needs and then integrate those into these greater projects.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, if there are any plans that you have in writing in terms of a community engagement strategy, could you please just have that as part of the presentation? And just send it to us. Thank you.
Well, we're working on it, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
So, again, I just spoke.
Just a rough outline, just something. That
Yeah. If I can talk to a gentleman in our office who's starting to work on the SOPs for outlines for that. So.
Thank you. The other thing that was in the letter was just the timeline for construction of trails and bikeways. In the letter, they talked about some examples of some of these trails and bikeways being really delayed, some even 7 to 10 years. And so could you talk a little bit about your plan just to complete some of those projects, specifically the trails and bikeways?
So one of the primary challenges with trying to get to construction is that we have a trailing lead time. We have to plan these projects out, and it takes allocations of resources to do the planning before we can allocate resources to do the construction. Right now, we have, I believe, 9 multimodal projects that are in somewhere in between the area of 0% and 100%. It is my goal to progress all of those portions as quickly to 100% and get them to construction as quickly as possible. This year, I started a number of months ago. We were not handed any completed 100% designs, so we're a little light on some of those construction elements. But as part of that, we are redoubling our efforts to streamline our project delivery pipeline this year. We are reworking it so that these projects have a direct path. The Department of Planning has done a great job setting up not just BCDOT, but the rest of the city for success in how we budget for these projects so that we are following a natural progression of come up with the planning, get the design, get to construction, and do it all in a concentrated and transparent timeframe. So to answer your question, all of our projects are seen as priorities. All of our projects are being accelerated to the greatest extent that we can. So just give us a little bit of time to get the engine running, and then I think you're going to be really surprised at what we do.
Thank you. My last question / comment is that the highway user revenue, hopefully that goes through this session in terms of creating a permanent increase. But a lot of headwinds are coming through incoming new administration. I wanted to get your thoughts on sort of alternative financing. I asked a department last week about P3, public-private partnerships, and I just didn't know if there's certain assets within the department that you're thinking about P3. I think with your federal transportation hat on, there might be some national examples about how cities are trying to look at alternative revenue sources, and I didn't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not opposed to P3 opportunities. I think, I definitely need to sit down and kind of scrub some of the situations and partnerships that we've had in the past. We have a lot of expired MOUs that I have been stumbling upon. And so I think there are some great opportunities for advancing expired revenue sources that we have had in the past. And so I would say there are opportunities for both P3 funding partnership opportunities. I think there are opportunities for reinvesting for MOUs within the city where people paid us for things they should have been paying us for, and we still do things for them. And we just, sometimes things fall by the wayside. But there are MOUs that I think that we can revisit that have existed, and kind of talk with some folks again about reinstating MOUs that could draw some revenue to the agency, and we can utilize it for some funding opportunities. I think there are some larger investment opportunities that we're thinking about as far as partnerships with and pilots with parking enforcement, with MTA and things like that. I think that we can also, look at our partners with Waterfront Partnership and Downtown Partnership. And I think we can also probably take a look at partnerships as we move along with developers throughout the city. Obviously, I need to talk to my big boss across the street and see what their thoughts are, but I definitely feel like there are some really great opportunities throughout the city that we can look at and try to make investments with them, drawing new partnerships and expanding old partnerships to create some additional revenue within the agency, and perhaps find ways to dedicate it to certain areas where we are lacking funding. And, who knows, it could go towards things like expanding, some of the bike infrastructure that we're lacking in that you mentioned for trails and things like that. Or, helping with the signalization projects that we're behind on. So I think there are some really critical opportunities that I know I would like for us to help dig into, and I know my colleagues would too. So I'm working to sit down with each division to see what some of the ideas that they've had that they haven't maybe gotten to jump on. It's always important to have people who are smarter than you working with you and for you. So I've got a lot of those great people here, so I look forward to talking to them to see what some of their ideas are and melding up our minds and figuring out what we can do together.
Commissioner McCutch?
Thank you very much for your presentation and for your whole team, because the Department of Transportation is a giant, multifaceted organization. I have to wonder, though, as you were interviewing for the position, didn't you find yourself saying, we have a massive structural problem that we do not have the resources to address, and aside from a lot of hope and wishing, we're not going to have those funds? Isn't that a conversation you must have had?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was. For those who know me here, I've never been one to bite my tongue. So I had a very frank conversation with my future boss at that time and my current boss now about the dire straits I feel like we're in. But I also had a frank conversation about the things that I foresee for the agency, that I foresee for the city, but also that I foresee in his investment and support, right? Like, it is not a unilateral thing that I am going to be the sole change agent within this agency. I mean, I would be it's a fool's errand, right, to come and think that. So I have partners at the Department of Planning. I have partners across the street in City Hall. I have partners at the City Council. I have partners throughout the city. I have partners in public-private partnership that I haven't explored yet. So I have partners that I am exploring to make these changes happen. Like, is it going to be quick? No. Is it going to be dirty and ugly? Absolutely. Are we going to have challenges? Yes. Is everything going to be perfect and successful? No. Right. Are we going to pilot things and see if they work? Yes. I don't, I can't tell you that it's going to be this, Olympic rise to glory story. But are things going to get better? Yes. I'm gonna say to you publicly and wherever this is recorded, yes, things are going to get better. So I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is. So that's how I feel about this. I wouldn't have taken the job if I didn't think that I could make a positive influence. And I also love a challenge, and I feel like this is a challenge.
Well, that's great. I'm looking to sense that urgency.
Yeah. I think it's very urgent. I live here. I've been living here, and, I commuted to DC for 3 years. And, I think when I did my interview, he's like, how do you know so much? I said, I live here. Like, it didn't mean that my commute to DC for 3 years didn't find me not still extremely invested in the place where I live. I managed to be my community association president while commuting to DC. I didn't call in any favors. I used 311. I walked my neighborhood with DPW, housing, DOT. Like, when I had problems in my neighborhood, I wrote an obscene amount of letters to get a crosswalk redone by my school. I got a stop sign put in that had been requested for 20 years. So I know, I got chills even saying that, like I know what needs to happen. And so like it's not about favors, it's about getting favor, So like I want to do the right things because I know the right things can be done, and I know that we can make the turnaround that we need.
Well, the one reason to be optimistic is that 25 years ago, I remember sitting in here discussing the school's budget. And at that time, we were heading towards $1 billion of unaddressed sort of repairs and management and upgrades. And here we are today, and through the help of the state, I think we're well on our way to at least addressing the worst of the situation.
Yeah.
And similarly, with DPW and our water systems, again, we're sort of looking over the cliff, a really bad situation, and through really capable and dedicated people, we're able to.
Absolutely.
And I trust the same will be happening in DOT, but
Yeah.
it's an issue. And when I look at this year's budget, my impression, I mean, I understand you have obligations, you have laws that you have to comply with. But on the whole, your budget seems to be so broad and so shallow that it's almost, I think you guys are just stretched way too thin. I can't set your priorities for you. Many other institutions and regulatory requirements set those priorities. But it's almost as though with the small amounts of funding that you can distribute to every single one of these different buckets, you're not allowing yourself enough money to make headway where you could. I'm sorry, because I know that's a problem that you guys probably recognize as well. But I gotta believe that when you say all of our projects are priorities, I'm like, no, that's not what I want to hear. I want to hear, instead of trying to do 7 projects this year, give me 3 that really matter. Make some decisions about, what are the priorities of our community? It's otherwise, you guys across the board, bridges, roads, repaving, you just can't, you don't have the resources to get it done. Yeah, we got 3 years of HER funding, which is a godsend. But we're still, with a development time and with ever increasing costs, those 3 years are going to go like that.
Right.
So as the captain of the ship, job one is find more money or decide to do less.
Oh yeah, I understand.
And
that.
that's an issue. So anyway, I've just felt as though I appreciate you're trying to respond to the city's residents' needs, but I think you guys have sort of are trying to do too much, even though you have to. So my second question is related to some of the letters that we have that's in the package, and obviously those letters are written by advocates, and they have the gift of having a narrow view. You're bike more. You're worrying about bikes. You're not worrying about all the other things that transportation has to work about. But the Bike More letter was a little alarming. I think only because when we build a bridge, that bridge has a 50-year, 75-year lifespan. When we have projects which are ready to begin, but don't address the commitments that we've made to citizens who in many cases don't have automobiles and have to get by on a bike or as a pedestrian, how the heck are we actually moving projects forward without accommodating these things? Which is, again, that's what I've learned from the letter. You guys may have a different perspective on this, but I certainly would say I hope that we are not building generational infrastructure which isn't accommodating some basic needs. So that's my comment on Bike More, and I won't go farther into that letter. I guess the last thing is a little thing, and is your relationship with other agencies, which everything you do, of course, is coordinated with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anybody that's a resident in Baltimore knows that since the pandemic, traffic safety has been lost. It's dangerous out there. spend some time on Northern Parkway, as I'm sure you do, and just enjoy having somebody in a hopped-up Honda Civic pass you in the parking lane at 70 miles an hour. So I see in your budget you have some funds for traffic calming. Please, put some rubber speed humps in those parking lanes. Do something cheap and effective to force people to drive more safely within that budget. And that's sort of, again, that's for you guys to think about, but I'm sure that the citizens of Baltimore would appreciate more forethought in terms of slowing these people down and using infrastructure to address public safety needs in that regard. So those are my comments.
No, I appreciate that, and I have taken notes, and I've taken notes for everyone. And if at any point you do feel inclined to email me additional comments or things like that you've thought of, please do feel free to do so. And I'd love for us to kind of get a written memo back to you with some of the things you said, with maybe a little bit more detailed responses and addressing what you've said, instead of us just giving you on the spot answers. Happy to do that.
That's great. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I appreciate my colleagues who have touched on a lot of the questions that I was going to ask. I'll only repeat a few of them.
Okay.
So Commissioner Jolin started with discussions about the resurfacing, and I'm going to try to keep this linear, but these issues are all very interconnected. So my street, I'm talking specifically about the 1100 and 1200 blocks of Mosier, has been repaved 3 times in the last 2 years. First, it was after the BGE gas line. Then it was after the water line. Then it was after the conduit. Which is, so my first, well, pause there. My question is, everybody knows what I'm getting at. We've talked about this over and over. Who has the ball on coordinating this so that the work gets done and the road gets paved once, the community doesn't have to wait 3 years, and we don't have to pay for it 3 times? And I'm sorry, I'm not to put you on the spot. I just want everyone to understand that that continues to be a very real issue. So there's that one. We've talked about the limited resources, and Commissioner McCoach, you just touched on sort of these kind of long-term delays in projects that never seem to happen. And I know that based on the new guidance from planning, all of the agencies are working harder to pull those projects forward and fully fund them so they can get done, so we don't run into these inflation problems, and so people don't have to keep waiting. And you acknowledge that, and so I understand that we're working towards that. My question is, looking backwards, how many, I get the feeling and I get this impression from some of the transfer requests that we get throughout the year. For example, we may get a request for increased funding for a resurfacing project, and we'll ask, well, why is this project over budget? Well, it was budgeted 5 years ago, and now the costs have increased. But for those 5 interim years, we didn't have the understanding that this money was waiting to be spent, or in some cases, there are projects that have been completed or are no longer viable, and that money is, sitting there until another project goes over budget, and then we ask to reallocate it. So my question, and I've asked this internally to the department, is I hope that we're working on some sort of accounting to understand where first of all, where there's any unspent or saved funds that can be allocated to these priorities. And then also if there are any projects that are at risk of, not moving forward and therefore going over budget because of whatever the holdup may be. I think it's really important that we're solving those problems, not just letting them age. So again, not really a question, more of a comment, but that just continues to be really important. And it touches all the agencies, like you mentioned.
May I make a comment
Please,
to that?
please.
I think both things you said, and I cringed with the first one because I'll be frank, I was here almost 10 years ago, and that was probably the bane of my existence, that a road would be torn up and then it would be paved. And it happened to me on the Maryland Avenue bike lane that I might have had to sell a kidney to get done anyway. And then they did it, it was put down, and then I want to say BG&E had line work to do, and then they had to tear it up, and then they did a terrible job putting it back down. That is probably one of my biggest priorities, is having a interagency work group, and also working with BG&E, Verizon, Comcast, in those regards, to try to get a list of where their work is going to be, and that it has to be a city sign off, and it needs to be in coordination with where Public Works will do their work and where we're planning to do work, and it needs to be coordinated, and maybe even a hierarchy of where and how. I think that's a huge challenge. I think also it could save the city an obscene amount of money, because at the end of the day, it's all in our right of way. And I can't imagine, but thinking about, and this is just me thinking out loud, but what Valerie said, how extensive the costs are for ADA, mandatory ADA improvements through the Federal Highway Administration. But maybe perhaps in some of the instances, they could eat the cost because they are
Doing
needing
it anyway.
us to tear the street up on their behalf. And that's just maybe some of the things that could happen. Second comment that you made is that I spoke with our finance person, Laura, last night, specifically about what you just said about funds that are sitting, kind of lying in wait, if you will, for projects, for it to build up enough funding to actually execute the project. So we did have a conversation about that. I have a meeting with her early next week to kind of dig more into our specific budget nuances, but that is one of the more prudent things we talked about, because of how we could look at some changes in how we do our budgeting and spending. And so I'm hoping to be able to report back on that as we move forward with making some adjustments to how we do budgeting.
Thank you, and that's really encouraging to hear that you're already on top of that, and your sentiments in general have been really positive, which I appreciate. Touching on the ADA issue, so first, that I'm very conscious and cognizant of the work that goes on throughout the city, and I pay a lot of attention to it. And I've seen the ADA improvements, where they're replacing corner ramps and, making them 90 degrees instead of 45 degrees, and correcting the grades and raising the curbs and adding the detectable warning strips that actually point you in the crosswalk and not into the middle of the street, all those things. So I see that work happening. At the same time, that very same resurfacing that has happened 3 times, at the end of it, they came back and put the crosswalk back the way it was, which is wrong. And so that continues to just be a challenge, and I'm not sure if that's a policy thing or a supervision thing. I know it's also hard to get them to put the crosswalks back the right way. So that's, again, another comment.
I want Valerie to address that, just because I can't speak to it, but I imagine she
So
probably...
in order to phrase that as a question, because I've heard it said, and I'm asking if it's correct, in addition to the ADA work that we're doing, do we require utility companies and subcontractors to replace it compliant or replace it how it was?
So again, Valerie LaCour, the street cuts regulations require that when you do a street cut for utilities, so that's BGE, DPW, anybody who's in our streets, you must replace in a permanent condition, number one, what was there, but number two, it must meet current ADA standards. So we have a city detail in our book of standards for crosswalks, and it specifically directs contractors, subcontractors, anybody working in our streets, how that crosswalk is supposed to go in so that it is ADA compliant, because crosswalks have specific requirements for ADA. And so we use our street cuts regulations to have anybody working in our streets, and that includes DOT, that they put it in the right location and per the current ADA standards. And if they don't, and I'm just going to say if they don't, as the Title II ADA coordinator for the City of Baltimore, you can send me the location, and we will find out who did it and make them do it correctly.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah. That's great. That's helpful. And I'm glad to, we're a team. I'm glad to support you guys as an extra set of eyes. But and I say this to all the agencies, the community, and you understand this, Director, we need the enforcement support. We can only call it into 311 so many times. We need the agencies to acknowledge and say that we're going to do better. So thank you.
You're welcome.
That's on the ADA stuff. Next, I'll go to something we haven't talked about, which is lighting.
Okay.
And so I'm also my community association president. We have that in common.
I'm recovering. I'm retired. I did my 2 years.
And so one of the issues that we hear about in West Baltimore, and I know it's the same in all of our neighborhoods, is the problem of lighting and the way that it contributes to the perception of safety and things like that. And it's funny how overlapping all these issues are, because I tell people all the time, in my neighborhood, people don't even walk on the sidewalks. People walk in the middle of the street.
Right.
And there's a number of reasons for that. One of them is the lighting is better in the street because the street lights that we have are designed to illuminate the streets, not the sidewalks. Another is because of the ramps and the sidewalks and the fact that a lot of people have mobility issues and you can't get down a lot of our sidewalks. So, it may sound like I'm telling stories, but these are like illustrations of how all these things really affect everyday people. And you mentioned you go out to the community and they ask you questions about the police department or about housing. And I know how that is too. What happens to us a lot of times is we have housing out and everyone wants to know about the lighting and they say, oh, that's DOT, which surprises a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so my first question is, what is being talked about in terms of adding pedestrian scale lighting to our communities? Another thing that's very visible that I'm sure everyone has seen is in different communities where folks have gone and put the string lights up. And it's wonderful. It's very nice. It gives that warm glow, and it's been great to see people take pride in their community and see that kind of proliferate around the city as everybody copies each other. But the fact is they're doing that to address a need, which is that the streets are dark and scary. And so as we try to do community development, we talk about public safety, and you mentioned public safety, and the police department says, well, public safety is not just up to us and all of that. So my question is, what are we doing about lighting, and how, as the communities, can we make appeals for improved lighting?
All right. So I think, and we don't have Tavon here, do we? Had a brief conversation, and admittedly, I don't feel like I can fully answer this, but I can definitely double back to you with an answer and quickly. But I know the brief conversation I had is that Our street lighting department, they are like making movements through communities to upgrade street lighting. I live in West Baltimore, and I believe in one of the neighborhoods that was mentioned to me. I can't remember the specific neighborhood, but he did specifically cite West Baltimore, that they are doing lighting upgrades and improvements. And it's street lighting upgrades and improvements. I can give you an example. In my neighborhood, I have, I don't know, arguably fairly old lights, and it's kind of like the yellow-ish lights. I don't know, they look kind of like mushrooms. And so they're kind of like yellow, so the ambient light you're getting is not bright on sidewalks, and it also seems to be more projected towards the street, so I know exactly what you're saying. But he noted that there are some lighting upgrades like coming to like side streets, like neighborhood streets, as opposed to like main thoroughfares. So like not just primary and secondary streets. I don't know like the necessary planning and timing of that. And if we don't have like a planning and timing component, I can definitely work with our street lighting folks and ask them what like the planning and timing component is. And I guess I would ask, do you regularly have streetlights out? And if that's a problem,
So our primary issue is not so much them being out, it's missing poles that don't get replaced because a speeding car runs into them and then they don't get replaced. So, and then those are harder to solve than getting BGE out to change a bulb. So it's more the missing poles, but it's more just our style of lighting that we have throughout the city in many places is inappropriate. And another way that it becomes a challenge, this is a small thing, but I'm gonna talk about this more in a minute, believe it or not. Here on the commission, we've got to balance a lot of different opinions, perspectives, interests. In my part of West Baltimore, we've got beautiful, mature street trees on my block and on some other blocks. It creates dissent among the community about the trees because the lights are so high up that the trees block the lights. And that is a problem. Some people think the solution is to get rid of the trees, which is not the solution and causes other problems. But if we had a lighting solution, then we could address the problem in a practical way without telling people that there's no solution, which is literally what I've had to tell people for the last few years. And so my question and my challenge to the department would be to figure out what a solution looks like, understanding we're not gonna relight the entire city in 1 year or in 6 years, but if we know what the solution is, then we can begin to implement it on a block-by-block basis or to incorporate it in developers' agreements for capital projects, or we can find ways to implement it. But right now, I don't think anybody knows what the solution is. And so that's, I think, what I would ask for from the department.
okay, no, that's a fair question. And I'll definitely talk to our lighting folks and try to get something back to you.
Just very briefly, because Commissioner Jolin already touched on the bike lane maintenance. And I heard your comment, Sarah, about vehicles are not capital. I recall reading that in the definition of what a capital project is that you shared with us at the beginning. Can you just clarify, is that all, it was vehicles, and was it and/or costs under $50,000? Like, does a fleet of vehicles still fall into that exception?
Yeah, they're two separate lines, so no vehicles and separately, nothing under $50,000, but no vehicles at all.
Okay, understood. And this can be rhetorical, but I am wondering how long it takes to plow our however many miles of bike lanes with 2 plows. But this goes back to the point I was just making about the trees, which may have seemed trivial, but there's obviously massive dissent in this city about bike lanes. And unfortunately, we keep giving ammunition to both sides, which makes it really hard in this room to bring folks together on the issue. You know, the users and the detractors alike would agree that the lack of maintenance that makes the bike lanes unusable is a real problem because the users, can't use them because of trash, snow, whatever. And then, the folks who are mad that they lost a lane or lost parking are saying, well, this is a waste because it's not being taken care of and not being used. And unfortunately, both sides are sort of correct. So I think it's really important as we move towards the Vision Zero and the multimodal city, which I really appreciate you acknowledging how important those priorities are. But we have to kind of navigate this, these political and people issues as well. And so my point there, also understanding that maintenance and, the equipment to maintain them is not capital, but, there's also a lot of finger pointing between agencies. DOT puts up a protected bike lane and then DPW just throws their hands up. Well, flex post, nothing I can do now. And so, we have to make sure that we're working together as agencies to have solutions. Hey, DPW, this is what we're doing. What are you going to need in order to maintain it? And then you guys can do like rocks, paper, scissors to figure out whose budget it goes in. But these things have to be solved. So thank you for humoring me on that one. Okay, lastly, maybe. Yesterday, I was working from home and I heard a commotion. I looked out the window and there was a little dust up in the intersection. So before I went outside to see what was going on, I quickly ran back my security camera to see what had happened. It was a gentleman and his young son, maybe, 7 or 8 years old, the two of them riding on a scooter, coming down Carrollton Avenue at 15 miles an hour, because that's how fast those scooters go. A vehicle headed east on Mosier, completely blew the stop sign, accelerated through the stop sign, as we see so often. This is a stop sign that my community specifically requested and had installed a few years ago. The gentleman and the boy had to bail out of the scooter, sprawled out in the street. Scooter slid under the Chevy. The driver stopped briefly, saw that nobody was dead, and then kept going. So when we talk about safety, and this is getting again at interagency cooperation, like what are we really doing for safety? I mean, it's not. First of all, the community's been asking for traffic calming in this location. It hasn't happened. Maybe after I send you this video, it will. But I guess what I'm getting at is nobody stops at that stop sign, and the police aren't going to do anything about it. So, and I mean, Commissioner McCoach mentioned the lawlessness, and we've all seen it. So my question here, I'll get to the point. In the absence of a law enforcement solution, what are we doing what's our strategy to make our roads safer? And the only reason I'm bringing it up in this context is, is there a technology solution? Is it cameras? Is there, the signalization and the road diets and everything are a piece of it, but what are your thoughts on what it will take to actually change people's behavior and make our roads safe for people who aren't in cars?
It's a fair question. And I think, it has to be behavior changes. I think oftentimes, it's driver issues, it's road conditions. I think we can certainly perhaps take a look at that area and do a speed study or take a look at like potential traffic calming measures to see what's happening there, if it's consistently an issue as far as like the speed going up, I mean, within that stop sign area, and people blowing through it. I think it's honestly too, though, like driver behavior. It could be an education issue in that particular sense. I would also like have, for us, I would like for us to like dig in a little bit more to like NHTSA's.
Sorry?
NHTSA National High, yeah. They have lots of grant opportunities. They have education opportunities. The state has heavily utilized them a lot. As far as like campaigns, as far as like roadway safety issues, I think we can maybe just take some lessons learned from them as far as like how we can incorporate some traffic safety issues as far as like driver safety issues in the city. I mean, unfortunately, it's learned behavior. Like if people see that they're going to be able to get away with it, people are going to just continue to get away with it. You know, I'm very much the same as you, as like somebody who like, I don't just go to my neighborhood. I kind of peruse the area just to like look for behaviors, like, because like I said, this is what I do. And stop signs, certain stop signs in my neighborhood, there are coasting stop signs. There are signs that no one stops at all. And, you know, what I call optional stop signs that people like. So it's really learned behavior. So it's trying to like change learned behaviors. And so that's something that is a little more challenging, but changing learned behaviors is a good opportunity to take a look into traffic calming options. And so
Can I ask you this? This is a little bit, so we heard last week from some of the other, or I'm sorry, it was from the Director of Finance, the need to find, you know, some additional revenue sources to, you know, support the borrowing we want to do for capital projects across the city. And so my question, while we're on this subject about like enforcement, like parking enforcement and enforcement in general, that's under DOT, right?
like traffic enforcement and
Well,
parking.
parking specifically, and I think parking I'm pretty sure is,
Yeah,
right? So
enforcement,
then
parking.
traffic, I don't believe is, am I correct?
Yeah.
So, again, a comment, not a question, but is that an opportunity for us to generate some additional revenue and create and achieve our safety goals as well?
I mean, we have speed cameras for traffic calming. We have other traffic calming mechanisms, but again, like the speed cameras and red light cameras are based on data that supports why it's important to have those two mechanisms there. So, you know, that being said, I would have to defer to, you know, our ATVS team and our traffic team to see about those particular areas. I mean, there are other options for traffic calming measures that if it's not, I guess, the monetized version of traffic calming, I think we can definitely check out the particular area and see what options we have as far as like safety measures and traffic calming measures.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I think I have one more.
Okay.
You guys are really gonna think I'm in left field now.
Okay.
So Director Ryer, you'll remember last year, you and the department, some staff from the department went on a trip to the Netherlands, was it Copenhagen? Rotterdam. And you came back and gave us a lovely presentation about some of the things that you saw and some of the things that you learned. One of the topics of discussion was pavers, like pavers, brick, stone for sidewalks. And the long and short of the pitch was, look how wonderful this is. They can pick up the pavers, do utility work, and put them back, and there's a little bit additional upfront cost to do a sidewalk in brick pavers compared to concrete, but the replacement cost is less, the environmental impact is less, and look how wonderful that is. You mentioned standard details, DOT standard details before, some of which I happen to be familiar with. And so DOT's standard detail for a brick paver sidewalk in the public right-of-way includes an asphalt base under the brick pavers, which adds the cost, but it also makes the assembly impermeable. And so when we hear from DPW and we talk about their MS4 permit and the limited means to reduce the impermeable surface within the public right-of-way, because they're like, oh yeah, the city owns a lot of land, but it's mostly paved streets. There's not that much you can do in terms of reducing impermeable. But we also own a lot of sidewalks, obviously. And so I just want to point that out as a suggestion. Again, interagency collaboration, that could be a lot of acreage that we could make impermeable, but it also could be a long-term operations savings when we think about resurfacing in similar vein to the streets. Not to mention how charming paver sidewalks are. So I wanted to share that with you. And I will stop there, but thank you so much for your presentation
no
and for
problem.
all your responses. And I'm really optimistic about the future, as you said, and let us know how we can support the department besides giving you more money.
All right, well, thank you all very much. And I just wanted to quickly thank my colleagues for helping me with this. I wanted to thank Hassan, Stu, Sean, Clea, Valerie, Scott, Bamal. The others left, but, and Scott. Yeah, thank you all very, very much for coming up, and Van Owen, hi. But thank you all for having me. I'm sorry I couldn't answer everything
no problem.
myself.
You did great.
But next time I will certainly do that. If you have any questions for me that you weren't able to ask, you know how to reach me via email. Please do feel free to do so. I think we all took notes, right? And we'll get back to you in some more detailed answers.
Thank you so much. And just
Yes.
before you walk
Sure.
away, did Commissioner Allen have any questions online?
We have, from the public, we have someone with their hand raised online, and
Oh.
I don't know if there's here in
Sure.
person.
Is there anyone in the audience that has a question for DOT?
Hello?
Mr. Weeks,
Can you guys hear me?
feel free to come up and make your comment if you'd like. Go
Commissioner
ahead.
Allen.
Commissioner Allen first, and then Mr. Weeks.
I'm sorry. So my iPad has like 2%, and I'm going to change over to my phone to listen. But I had a question. I will hold it, but I just wanted to thank the new director for her presentation. Several things that she said resonated with me. I can't elaborate right now because I'm about to be cut off. But the underfunded and under-resourced really resonated. So welcome to Baltimore, and after I heard the rest of what you said, welcome back to Baltimore.
Thank you so much. Look forward to meeting with you in person.
Thanks. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll take comments from the public. Mr. Weeks, just please step up and
Oh, Jed,
introduce
you
yourself.
can Come up here.
Hi, Jed Weeks. I'm the Executive Director of Bike More, the lobbyist for Bike More in Action. Thank you all for reading our letter, so I don't need to read it all to you. I just wanted to highlight a couple key points there, and maybe I could editorialize a little bit on some of your questions. I think our big concern here is really the HUR stuff. That sunset is very close, and we need to demonstrate that we are meeting the legislative intent of that increased HUR. I don't think we're doing that. First, I think it was a very clever financing mechanism to basically use our reduced HUR to leverage GO bonds. The intent when we raised our HUR was to both use more HUR on capital projects, but also use that HUR to leverage more GO bonds. And we are not doing that. We basically took away the GO bonds from the DOT financing mechanism. And so I think there are people in Annapolis, not a part of our delegation, who fought very hard, but people outside of the city that will critique that, and rightfully so. And so that's something we really should consider restoring, which would give DOT, an even bigger financing boost. The other issue is we need to actually deliver projects, and we need to deliver projects that are in compliance with our laws. And so I think you saw in our letter a number of examples where our largest capital projects are the projects that are not complying with our Complete Streets Ordinance. We've got a lot of really great projects in the CIP and from the Planning Division, a lot of bike facilities and trails that were supposed to be built 10 years ago. I'm glad to see them actually, maybe they're gonna get built in the next year or two. But those large capital projects, our bridges, our major streetscapes, those are the projects that have broad compliance issues, and that not only will be pointed to in Annapolis, critiqued by advocates like us. If someone is injured or killed on one of those projects and it is non-compliant, that opens up tremendous liability to the city, and we don't want to be paying out huge settlements that we could be using to construct more infrastructure. So I detailed a number of those in the letter. Hope you guys just take a look at that. And I think the large problem here is the siloed nature of our DOT. We have a planning division that is generating lots of great, essentially quick build projects. But we have tech, bridges, other projects that don't really have eyes from the planning division on them. And that doesn't make any sense. We should be generating projects from our planning division. And then those other groups should be doing the traffic engineering and construction of those projects, but they shouldn't be generating those ideas and doing all of that planning in a silo away from the actual planners in the agency. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I'm really encouraged to have Director Macbeth here. And I think some real agency reform is needed, and I'm really hopeful that maybe next year we can come back and talk about some of those really cool reforms. If I have another minute or two, I just wanted to go over a couple other things that you all raised. With the street sweeper funding, that was actually in the operating budget in FY 2019. It was $135,000 to buy the sweeper, another $150,000 for overtime to utilize the sweeper. It was never purchased. I don't know why. I don't know if that money is still available, but it would be really great, to get a sweeper purchased. That said, it is not DOT's responsibility to sweep the streets. That is DOT trying to sweep lanes. That is DPW's responsibility to sweep. Under ordinance, they have to sweep the entire street. DPW is saying, oh, the bike lane's not part of the street, but if you look at our city code, it is in fact part of the street. And so they are required to do that sweeping. They have the ability to sweep all of our two-way facilities and all of our shared use trails because those are wide enough for a full-size sweeper to go down. And so they could do that today. They're just choosing not to. The flex posts, every other city in North America drives over the flex post, just like every driver that illegally parks in a bike lane, and then they sweep the bike lane. It's no big deal. Where we need specialized equipment is our one-way bike facilities. So that's like Harford Road, where it's narrower. And we do have the plow equipment for that now, but we do need the sweeper for that. And either DPW could have included that in their massive new sweeper purchase and lease agreement that they just did. Maybe it's not too late to fix that. Or we can get this one from DOT. But either way, it is a solvable issue. I think the other big thing really is just this ADA compliance stuff and the street cut stuff that you all raised. There are numerous instances, both with DPW and our utilities, where they are restriping the road beds afterwards that are non-compliant with the Complete Streets Ordinance. So Director Macbeth brought up Maryland Avenue and BGE ripping it up right after it was installed. There was actually a large DPW project on Maryland Avenue recently where they installed illegal maintenance of traffic. We got DOT to work with them to solve that, which was very nice, but then when they came back and restriped it, they restriped it non-compliant with ordinance. And so that's something that happens over and over again with our DPW, who are frankly resurfacing and restriping more streets than DOT. And they are required to comply with the law. And it's also happening with BGE where, not only are they digging up, things and not putting them back to a better standard, they're also digging up our existing traffic calming and then not replacing it. They're just putting back the old configuration. And so they're actually removing things that our DOT has installed. And I think the last sort of big piece here is the community engagement and then also potential financing mechanisms. We have this great Complete Streets Ordinance and manual. The manual has like a project delivery spreadsheet that talks about how you go from selecting a project and evaluating whether or not you want to include it, all the way through project evaluation, construction in between. None of our DOT projects are following that process, which is legally mandated in that manual. And so you have broad inconsistency. You might have a bike lane project that has 27 community meetings over 7 years. Then you have a citywide retiming, which is a huge project, and it might have one community meeting. I don't even know if it had one. And so it's just wholly inconsistent. And that's why we worked so hard to pass this ordinance and develop this manual. It's because it has consistent standards that every single part of the agency is supposed to follow. And so I think we just really need to look at what we've already instructed the agency to do and ensure they're complying with that rather than, trying to reinvent the wheel on a lot of things. And then on the financing side of things, beyond the Go Bond idea, I think there are a lot of other things that other jurisdictions are doing very well. So Milwaukee, who built 40 miles of protective facilities last year, similar sized city, similar demographics, similar deferred maintenance issues. They don't actually have a DOT, they just have a DPW, so they have 1,000 fewer employees and they're doing this. They actually use TIF financing in their Main Street districts to do whole streetscapes. And so that's like a really sort of clever financing mechanism. You can do things like local parking area district taxes, where like the parking revenues for a certain area go to the improvements in those neighborhoods. Expanded automated enforcement is an option. We have the authorization to do bus lane camera enforcement in the city, but DOT has not, for those 2 or 3 years, actually developed that enforcement mechanism, which could bring a lot of revenue in. We're not doing overnight enforcement. People know that, so they park illegally everywhere. We don't really have routine enforcement of our bike lanes. We got about 3 tickets a month in bike lanes, and if you just hired someone to ride up and down Maryland Avenue, they pay for themselves in 3 weeks for an entire annual salary. So I think there are a lot of revenue ideas, and happy to meet with anyone and talk about those, but I just wanted to address some of your additional concerns. Any questions for me? Cool, thank you.
Thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
We have 2 people online. who'd
We had
like to
2
speak.
questions online?
Yes.
Please.
All right, Melanie. Oops. Okay, Melanie, you should be able to speak now.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
My name is Melanie Shire. I live in the Southwest. I'm permanently involved with my neighborhood associations as well. We did just have DOT planning out in 3 neighborhoods for like traffic calming. I'm glad to see that's in the Cip budget next year. I left a comment in the chat. I don't know if you all are going to even read those, but I'll reiterate it quickly. I'm a little bit disappointed that Southwest multimodal improvements, this is something that's been in planning for a decade. Miss Macbeth was on the actual original document as one of the signatories on it back a decade ago. But those got dropped from the CIP, it looks like. It looks like we're kind of restarting this process all over again. And it just is just shame as a neighbor and as someone in the area, and like we all deal with this, and we heard the comments earlier about how like unsafe some of our intersections are. We've had kids get killed by cars recklessly driving when they're trying to walk home from school. And it feels like, just from the perspective of someone on the ground who's trying to like work with DOT, and quick plug, Troy Munson is our new DOT neighborhood coordinator. Fantastic dude, thumbs up. I don't know if he's in the room, but we're a big fan of him. He just started this year and he's really great to talk to. But there's this feeling like a lot of neighbors just feel hopeless. Like they don't come out to the neighborhood walks when they're planned. They're often held, like we try to schedule them around work hours, but then like it's hard to get people to feel like there's an opportunity for improvement here. And then when we have things like stuff in planning that has been around for a long time that comes back and then it just gets canceled or pulled down, we don't hear about why. It gets very like distressing to the neighbors. They're like, this whole process often starts around someone getting hit by a car or something, and then it takes a decade, and then nothing happens, and then we are left kind of holding an empty bag here, like, okay, well, I guess that went under the rug, because we all understand the turnover at the department. We all understand that, like, we heard all the comments about why the budget is so slim, but my comment, my request here is specifically, this probably comes back to the siloing issue that when we talk to our planners, they will go and reach out and try to find information on like, because we'll read the Cip reports, we'll actually like be a little bit nerdy about it and try to find out why things are happening, where they're happening, contact our planning outreach advocates, say, okay, well, what's the plan here? And they'll go and contact the people they know in the agency, and then months later they'll get back like, I never heard back. So it's not just from the front, it's also internal to DOT that some of your own like employees can't get information inside the agency. So just to support what Jed said, I'm very hopeful for agency reforms that might come down the line to help fix this, because like we're eager to work with DOT to like try to get that neighborhood outreach you want. But if every year there's a new planner that comes out and talks about doing a new project and saying we're going to study these streets and never hear back, and then the next year it's someone completely different, people just stop turning out. So I'm hoping that can turn around at some point. I'm sorry for being out of breath. I'm walking around DC, but thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for letting us know that. And I'm going to get your name and information from Sarah.
Yes, I can share the, there's additional comments in the chat. But
Okay.
we have one more person who has asked to speak.
Okay.
Go ahead. Michiru? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, my name is Michiru. I used to live in Southwest Baltimore, but now I live in Northwest. But I heard a discussion about, specifically, I don't remember who was talking about it, but the intersection of Carrollton and Mosher was brought up, and how people just run stoplights, not stoplights, stop signs in the city. Like, that's a problem everywhere. And I feel like, I heard mention of like, we have speed cameras, we have like red light cameras, all these cameras, all these technologies. But I feel like that's thinking a little bit too broad, because sometimes I have to go out into the county, and every time I go out there, I realize like, wow, they're really implementing a lot of like really simple raised crosswalks at high traffic pedestrian crossings and unsafe intersections. And I don't think I've seen any in the city so far. And I feel like raised crosswalks are a really great investment for especially intersections where people just run stop signs, because it puts a physical barrier in place instead of just a line that's painted on the road. Like, you don't just fly over it's like a speed bump, but it's a crosswalk. So it's like, it does double duty. It makes it easier for people to cross the street who have like maybe disabilities, because they don't have to go down these ramps or whatever. They can just stay at a level crosswalk and get across. But also it slows people down, because we all know what happens if you take a speed bump too fast, you go into space. So I feel like that's an investment that we should be making in mass in a lot of places, and like a lot of other traffic calming solutions, we are not making them in the city, and it's something like I haven't seen been looked into enough. Additionally, I think I heard from Mel that we have a lot of issue as communities communicating with DOT and trying to get them to come out and do things, or trying to get information from them, or trying to get them to advance projects that take a decade and then nothing happens. And a lot of these communities just want to be able to get stuff done, and they're just being held back by DOT when they could do better if they were to like take on the project themselves. And I think the DOT should be empowering neighborhoods to apply for like traffic calming grants and bike lanes and whatever that they want in their community. And DOT should be empowering them to make those changes and apply for those grants themselves, instead of just being an additional roadblock in that process if they want to go that way. Because I know I used to live in the same community as Mel, and they're trying to apply for grants to build bike lanes and traffic calming in that community. And instead of like the DOT being helpful, giving information about, how do I apply for these grants? How do I do all these things? It's an extremely complicated process. They just often end up being a roadblock or not very helpful, or they don't have the information that they really should have. Because we've all basically come to the point where we're like, the DOT isn't going to build this for us. We have to do it ourselves if we want this to happen at all. And so I think if, especially if with like the budget concerns, if communities want something built and you can't fund it or whatever the reason be, the DOT should be there helping the process of the community trying to get these traffic calming implemented instead of just being a roadblock or just not caring. That's all I have to say. Thank you. And thank you all for holding this meeting.
Thank you, sir, for that feedback. Carrollton and Mosier does volunteer to be a pilot site for the raised crosswalk.
Noted. Just really quickly, Hassan wanted an opportunity just to address some of the safety questions that you had, or do you have time for him to make a few comments?
Please.
Okay. Come on up, Hassan.
Thanks, ma'am. My name is Hassan Raza. I'm Deputy Director at DOT. Just as a background, I've had 38 years. I worked with federal government, and I worked with 3 states. I just want to talk a little bit about safety. You have brought up about the behavioral issues. And the director has mentioned about National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which primarily deals with the behavioral issue. Nationwide, we have over 90% of the fatalities and crashes occur because of the behavior. The studies have shown that only about 5% are related to the engineering side of things. So I just want to mention that with the traffic calming, everything what we do, it has really not brought us the results which we expect, not only in the city, but the whole country. There's one thing can be done, which has really done wonderful in other countries, and that is to pass legislation to increase the fines. In Australia, you go 10 mile over limit, you got $1,000 fine. Now that will change the behavior. So that's up to you. I just wanted to kind of bring it up, couldn't hold it back, because whatever we do on engineering side, and I have a passion, believe me, I've been watching traffic fatalities over the last 30, I've been working for like 45 years. They've gone from 40,000 per year to 30,000 per year. It's just like a plane coming down every year. There's a lot of talk about it, but in actuality, there's not a lot of action. The real issue is driver behavior, and it is very, very difficult. I have had meetings with the doctors, the psychologists from NHTSA to figure out, can we do anything? And we really have not been able to make a big dent. So my appeal to all you is see if you can look at the legislation and increase the fines. Thanks.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes.
In the situation that I just, thank you, yeah, I was forgetting this thing. In the situation where I described of Northern Parkway, where, you'll be sitting there at the signal, and somebody will pull up next to you on the right-hand side in the parking lane. Then the light turns and bam, they're out of there. And they're running down that parking lane. Why can't we just put a Jersey barrier, literally, on the other side of the intersection as though it were a pooch out?
Yeah.
That's not so hard.
The barriers, if you like to know, 10% of the fatality nationwide are caused by driver hitting the barriers. So barrier is not a real solution. We need a. Huh?
There would be a learning curve.
Yeah, there will be. Somebody hit the barrier. The problem is that their car will be hurt, and they may get hurt, but they most likely will swing around and hit the other cars, cause even more damage. Now, if we have the space, we can put a cable barrier, which are a lot more friendly. They don't hurt the car, and also they're the best barrier you can, but we don't have the right of way to place them. It really goes back to that, how can we stop people driving fast? That's the key. We have, we call them 3 E's, engineering, enforcement, emergency medical services. Everything has been, believe me, tried. And it's not working. It's not making the big difference. it will make small differences, but we have to change the driver behavior so they don't drive fast. So anything we can do, and that's why all the traffic calming and other things come into play, that we do those. But as you mentioned, people just go by the stop sign. Where I live just north of Northern Parkway. There are traffic lights. There's certain thing we can do. There's a main road where all the traffic are going up, and there's a side road where there's no traffic, but the light still stays on for a minute. And that is encouraging people to drive right through the stop sign, and I've seen it all the time. But that's where some of the engineering comes in, that we should be looking at that, our traffic signal and all other kind of things. Can we affect that? But again, the difference is not going to be that great unless we do something drastic to really change people's behavior. A lot of education programs, other things have been implemented. I'm sorry to say, but I have not seen, for 46 years I've been preaching about safety in various arenas. I haven't seen something make real difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just quickly, and I was scrolling through my emails looking for it, but I did find it while Hassan was talking. So on the 14th, a bill, House Bill 182 and Senate Bill 118 for the Maryland General Assembly was introduced. And this is a bill that basically discusses about tiered fines based on speed. And it's not relegated to just work zones. It's speeding, period. So, and it's tiered based on the speed range that you're over the speed limit. So just something to look into if you're interested in seeing it, or you'd like to talk to your respective delegates and senators about your support for it. But yeah.
Thank you so much. With that, we will finally let you go.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.